Welcome to another episode of Scottish Murders. I'm Dawn. This case was supposed to be a short episode, but when I sat down and started to research, I realised that there was a lot more that I wanted to include than I originally thought. So I ran out of time getting the full episode written and edited to be released in time. But I wanted to get something out to you today, so I've split the episode into two parts. Part 1 today and part 2 likely on Thursday. And then on Friday, Halloween, there will be a super mini special Halloween episode. But back to this episode. Like I mentioned at the end of last week's episode, this case will focus more on the person who carried out the crimes, more so than the victims. The reason for this will become clear. I'm also interested to hear what your thoughts are after listening to both episodes. I've certainly given plenty of my thoughts and opinions. I got a lot of information for these episodes from the Law Killers book, written by Alexander McGregor. And finally, I'm giving a trigger warning. Please be aware that this episode does cover the topic of rape, so listener discretion is advised. So without further ado, let's get on with part 1. So I don't know about you, but a lot of my food shopping nowadays I get delivered, but I do still nip into supermarkets in between for bits and bobs throughout the week. Well, that was exactly what scientist Dr. Francis Smith was doing. I'm usually never alone, but what happened to Dr. Smith would terrify me if I was. After Dr. Smith had finished work on the evening of Friday the 3rd of February 2006, she stopped at Sainsbury's Superstore on Baldovie Road in Broughty Ferry, Dundee, where she spent a short while wandering around picking up something for her tea, before paying for her shopping and walking out of the exit towards the now dark and sparse car park and her car. She opened the doors of her car and began to unload her shopping bags into the passenger seat, before suddenly finding herself being grabbed around the waist from behind. According to the Law Killers book, Dr. Smith's attacker pinned her arms to her sides and dragged her around to the driver's side of the car. Despite being caught unaware and in a panic, Dr. Smith managed to scream before her attacker placed one hand over her mouth, another around her throat, and after opening the driver's side door, he bundled her into the seat, before apparently sitting on top of her to shut her up. Sadly, the few shoppers that were still in the car park thought that a domestic was going on, and so dismissed the scream. Inside the car, Dr. Smith was then ordered to sit on the passenger seat, and the car keys were grabbed from her hands. As her attacker tried to put the keys into the ignition to start the car, Dr. Smith managed to open the passenger door, but before she could throw herself from the car, she was pulled violently back into the car by an arm around her throat. She did manage to shout again at this point, but again, anybody nearby dismissed this as a couple having a domestic. Now back in the car, Dr. Smith's attacker whispered in her ear menacingly to stop doing that. Again, the attacker tried and this time succeeded in starting the car, but a determined Dr. Smith managed to get the keys from the ignition and put the hazards on and sound the horn. Again, though, any nearby shoppers, while taking a brief, curious glance at what was going on, dismissed this as a couple fighting and they just didn't want to interfere. However, with Dr. Francis Smith putting up such a fight and not making it easy for her attacker to abduct her, and perhaps worrying that a passerby might eventually come to see what was really going on if the disturbance continued, Dr. Smith's attacker silently opened the car door and began to get out of the car, before then stopping and turning to Dr. Smith and pleading with her that, "I really need your help. I'm really desperate. I really need your help." Shocked by her attacker's sudden meekness, Dr. Smith asked the man what it was they needed from her, to which he replied, "I really need to get to Lochee," which was a quieter area located a few miles away. Dr. Smith told the man that, "I can't take you there. You really scared me. You know I can't take you there." At which point her attacker's shoulders slumped and he quietly slipped from the car into the night as quickly as he had arrived. As Dr. Smith tried to calm her breathing, she watched the man disappear into a nearby housing estate before she then, with remarkable composure, got out of her car and rushed back towards the supermarket, where staff called the police. However, despite many appeals, and the supermarket having CCTV, which had picked up this man arriving at the store 40 minutes before he had grabbed Dr. Smith and walking around the store but never buying anything, and then being seen hanging about outside the store and watching people, and then apparently moving towards the cash machine before changing his mind, it would take 3 weeks to finally track this man down. And it was through a very observant detective finally noticing a tiny detail on the CCTV footage. Apparently, this man had been wearing a jacket that had a distinctive feature on it that allowed detectives to trace this particular batch of jackets to a second-hand charity furniture organisation in Dundee, who, upon being shown the CCTV footage of the man who had attacked Dr. Smith, immediately were able to identify the man as one of their employees, 44-year-old John Cant Smith. The organisation also told the police that on the day of the attempted abduction, he had not shown up for work. John Cant Smith was quickly located at his home at Carmichael Court and arrested. He initially denied any involvement in the attempted abduction, but he later confessed, telling detectives that the crime had not been sexually motivated, but that he had been desperate as he was addicted to cocaine and he owed his drug dealer £350 before he could get any more. According to the Law Killer's book, this was confirmed following a sample of John Smith's blood being tested and his bank account being examined. Regardless, John Cant Smith was charged with attempting to abduct Dr. Smith and appeared at the High Court in Edinburgh on the 12th of June 2006. His defence counsel explained to the presiding judge that apparently John Smith had little recollection of what happened on the day of the attempted abduction, but that his initial intention had been to rob someone when they used a cash machine. However, when this had not been as easy as he had thought, he decided to find someone who would drive him to a less busy cash machine and make them use the cash machine and steal their money. Having listened to what the defence had to say and taking into account the fact that John Cant Smith had owned up to his crimes at an early stage, the presiding judge sentenced him to 5 years, saying that if he hadn't admitted to his crimes early on, he would have given him 7 years. John Cant Smith sat unemotionally as the judge sentenced him, before he was led away. Now you might be thinking that, okay, so that sounds a reasonable sentence for his crime, what's the problem? Well, the thing that Dr. Frances Smith found out for the first time at that court hearing, and that shocked, concerned and annoyed both her and many, many others, was the fact that this wasn't the first time John Cant Smith had been in court or in jail. Which led to the question on everyone's lips, why had this man ever been released from prison to have been able to attempt to abduct Dr. Frances Smith? To find out where this story began, I'm taking you back to the early hours of Monday the 11th of April 1983, and 21-year-old John Cant Smith, who had only been released from a young offenders centre a few months before, was making his way home after a night out drinking. As he neared home, he decided he would break into his neighbour's house, only a couple of houses away from his own home, and he'd see what he could steal. As this family of husband, wife and 21-year-old daughter were his close neighbours, he knew of their routine. He knew that the husband worked night shift at a bakery and wouldn't be home, and that the 21-year-old daughter's boyfriend would have left hours before. So he knew there would be nobody home able to apprehend him if he got caught. And so he broke into this family's home, while the mother and daughter slept soundly, unaware of what horror was about to climb through their downstairs window. What happens next does involve the rape of the 21-year-old daughter, so listener discretion is advised. I will not be going into details, but at 5 a.m, the 21-year-old daughter woke suddenly from a deep sleep, having been sure she'd heard a noise coming from her mother's room. Perhaps a gasp, but as she listened, all seemed quiet in the house. And so she lay back down, not having to get up for work for a couple of hours, and closed her eyes. Seconds later, they sprang back open, as she now heard somebody's distinct heavy breathing, and that person was in her bedroom. Before the girl could do anything, the bedclothes were suddenly pulled from the bed, and the terrified girl was faced with a man standing at the side of her bed. In his hand, he held a large kitchen knife. The man's hands had blood on them, and blood dripped from the knife. In utter shock at what was about to happen to her, realization dawned on the girl that the noise, the gasp she thought she had heard coming from her mother's bedroom, had been real. The blood on the man's hands and the knife left her in no doubt as to what had been done to her mother. As these thoughts raced through her mind, this man, all the while threatening her with a knife, lay down beside her in the bed and raped her twice. This 21-year-old girl's ordeal went on for 2 long hours, with this man informing her that he had killed her mother. As time went on and the morning started to lighten, the 21-year-old girl was able to see the man more clearly, and she was shocked to realize that she knew this man, that he lived only a couple of doors down from her family. It was John Cant Smith. As John Smith started to inform her that he would be killing her next, she realized if he wanted to get away with what he had done to her and her mother, he would have no choice but to kill her. And so amazingly, this 21-year-old girl found the strength and calmness to gently persuade this man, begging and pleading when necessary, that she wouldn't say anything. He could just leave and nothing further would come of it. And amazingly, he took heed, and about 7 a.m, he simply got up from the bed and left the house, still carrying the bloodied knife. This brave but severely traumatized 21-year-old girl waited until she was sure her attacker had left the house and gotten away, before she slowly put some clothes on and with a deep sadness went into her mother's room. Her 61-year-old mother sadly lay dead, having been stabbed and cut severely by John Cant Smith. The 21-year-old girl then left her home and went to a nearby friend's house and told her of what had happened to her and her mother and who had carried out the brutal and unprovoked attack, while mother and daughter lay sleeping in their own home. The police were called and, following being told of who the perpetrator had been, went immediately to John Cant Smith's home to arrest him. But he wasn't there. He was, however, quickly traced to his sister's home, where police found him fast asleep on the sofa. He was arrested and taken to the local police station, where, according to the law killer's book, he calmly described the events that had taken place that very morning. He admitted breaking into the house a couple of doors from his. He admitted stabbing someone, although the post-mortem revealed that the 61-year-old mother had been stabbed and cut repeatedly and given no chance to defend herself. He then said what he had done to the 21-year-old girl, before, with no emotion, saying that he had then walked to his sister's house, where he had washed the blood from his hands and clothes. Oh, and if they were interested in recovering the knife he used, which he had picked up from the kitchen in the family's home, they could find that in a rubbish bin near his sister's house. He went on to say that he had not intended to rape or kill anyone, he only planned on stealing from the house. So, as he made a full confession, no trial was needed, and I can only imagine how the 21-year-old girl must have felt about that, having gone through something so horrific and traumatic, and her mother being murdered. Not having to stand up in court and repeat what had happened to her in the early hours of the morning must have been such a huge relief. It still needed to go through the process though, and so 2 months after the horrendous attack and murder, John Cant Smith appeared at the High Court in Edinburgh, where he again confessed to what he had done. Apparently, according to the law killer's book, the presiding judge, Lord Wheatley, was unable to conceal his distaste, and told John Cant Smith, "In view of what has been said, there is nothing I can say to save you, save this. These 2 atrocious crimes were carried out within a home, and people, particularly women, are entitled to expect that in their home they are safe from attacks such as you perpetrated. If women cannot be safe in their own home, then society has reached a sorry state. Therefore, in order to mark the court's great displeasure and to deter others, I propose to fashion my sentence accordingly." He then sentenced John Cant Smith to life imprisonment for the murder and 7 years for the rape, to run concurrently to his life imprisonment punishment part sentence, which astonishingly, based on murders committed nowadays and those sentences, was only 12 years. He only had to serve 12 years before he could be eligible to apply for parole. I was shocked when I read that. But apparently back at that time in the 80s, This was quite normal and an acceptable punishment, and it brought absolutely no public outcry. There would definitely be an outcry nowadays if those crimes happened, and that was the punishment. While I don't think the sentence imposed by the judge was nearly good enough, I commend him for what he said next. And it's the very reason why you'll notice that I've mentioned no names or anything else that could identify who the murder and rape victims were when talking about this particular case. Following the prosecution making an impassioned plea to the judge about just what a significant effect the rape ordeal had had on the 21-year-old victim and how it was felt that they should be shielded from any further publicity that would further add to the family's ordeal, the judge asked the press not to identify the victims after the harrowing experience the family had already endured at the hands of this evil young man. And to this day, not one mention of names, places, or anything else that could identify the family that suffered so very much has ever been uttered. Now I'm going to leave it there for part 1, but part 2 will be out on Thursday this week, and it will continue to focus on the criminal life of John Cant Smith and ask again and again why this man was ever released from prison. Until then, I've been your host, Dawn.
Scottish Murders is a production of Clurin Ton.